not a mental health professional. However, we'll come on to talk a little bit more about all of that. And Anna, perhaps if you just want to share the big picture. What I've put together is a little graphic of the ground that I hope that we can cover. And it's also something that I hope we can work together on, putting more detail under some of the boxes. Don't worry if you can't see it exactly the way that it is at the moment, because you're all going to get this. And I'll probably do a follow-up one after we've done this workshop, I guess we'll call it, that will contain more of the knowledge that we've tried to generate together about this whole topic of well-being. So what we'll do is we'll just let Anna get into it so she can sort of zoom in a bit. Can you make it like go up to the screen a bit more? And then, yeah, cool. So it's a little journey that we're going to go on. And that's a good place to start, Anna. So right there, we're just at the welcome, and there's a little picture of me saying I'm not an expert. And we're going to touch on the context of us focusing mostly on mental and emotional well-being, but that it's a much bigger context. And then if you shift over to the right, Anna, we'll go through a few little practices. How does that work? Oh, yeah, it might be a bit clunky. And we'll talk a little bit about mental health first aid, and we'll talk a lot, hopefully, about making space for mental health wellbeing in our hubs at work. So that's pretty well where we're at here, as I'm expecting that we're all turning up here as people who have got some role in being responsible for a whole hub and thinking about how mental health or mental wellbeing is part of that mahi. Yeah. So I think we'll drop out of Anna, and if in the chat, if you want to have a more closer look at that, you can go straight to those documents and then you can navigate around them if you want. Yeah. So to kickstart, really, I've got a little, it's a sort of a whakatauki that I just wanted to share with you to wake us all up a bit. It says, He kaha kirikiri tō te whatu, which loosely translated says, the pupil of the eye has such intensity. Look yourself in the eye. And I guess this is the first part of what I want to talk about in terms of the context, is that there's a little diagram there in the visual, if you want to look at it, which says that often I think we start off with thinking about issues like health and well-being in the workplace. Sometimes I think we start off at crisis mode, you know, that analogy of the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, or we're very downstream sometimes in our thinking about this, is that a problem will turn up and suddenly it gets to the top of the list and we have to do something about it. And so what I want us to encourage our conversation today to be about, yes, absolutely dealing with those things when it becomes right there in case, but also thinking about going a bit further upstream in the sources of some of these issues. And ultimately, I guess what I'm saying is that for all mental health stuff, some of the upstream is about being in touch with ourselves as well, particularly when we're in leadership positions. So today is not going to be asking you to share anything, none of that, but I just want to sort of put that there up first, which is to partly challenge ourselves, but partly also to extend the invitation to everyone here to say, actually, you've got to look after yourself too, maybe even first. Look yourself in the eye. And that can be with a great intensity of love, or it could be a searing bit of honesty. So even just to start that, I'm not going to ask you to share anything with anybody else, but just take a little moment now to turn inside a bit and just think, not overall in your life, but right now, today, this morning here, at whatever time it is, how are you in yourself in terms of your mental well-being now? Right now, just try and connect somehow with it, with a very open mind, just to see what is, not what should be, not what was, not what might be tomorrow, just what is now. And say hi to that. Say, welcome, whatever it is that you are today. Just that, that's all I'm asking you to do. Just to notice right now and to say hi to it. It might be a familiar hi. Oh, it's you, old. Or it might be, oh. For example, I noticed this morning that I was just starting to feel irritated about everything. Took ages for my computer to load up. The dog was barking. Then the cat came in and started meowing, and and I just had this really scratchy feeling. And because I was obviously anticipating that I'd be doing a mental well-being session, I thought, okay, what to do? And I just thought, okay, I'll do what I know I could do, which is just to go, hi, Scratchy, and just sink into it a little bit and acknowledge that's where I'm at right now. And just by doing that, for me anyway, that allowed me to say hi to it. I wasn't going to squash it or suppress it. I was just going to say hi to it and acknowledge it and go, oh yeah, okay, I see you there. Almost have a little conversation with it, which is, could I just let you go a bit, because I'd really like to enter this workshop with a bit, I don't want to go in there unconsciously scratchy, because then I'll probably rush and whatever. I just want to be able to go into it with as much presence as I can gather. And that for me is almost like the beginning of everything, is to be able to look myself in the eye a little bit, and not too judgmentally, because of course I'm always happy to jump over into that side of things and go, oh, this is who's here today. Right, okay, that's the team inside me that I'm managing today. And how can I notice that enough so that when I come to this, I'm here with a certain amount of awareness of what I'm handling in myself before I start trying to handle everything else. So I guess that's just an introduction to the context of this, which is, yes, we're going to talk about our roles as managers of well-being, if you can do such a thing. And sometimes it starts with us. I am going to get to a point where I ask deliberate questions. For these few moments, you're putting up with listening to me. But please, we're going to use chat a lot. So Anna will help me, let me know if there's anything major in the chat, but if you're used to using chat, that would be great. Why have I got any right to be talking about or helping us have a bit more of a collab about well-being? I guess I have had my own struggles with mental health, and that really opened me up, I think, to be a lot more empathetic to others in that situation. And so then I became a lot more curious about it, and have done lots of things in a non-official capacity. So for example, I think that peer-to-peer mental health support and that unofficial mental health support is extremely powerful. So I spent some time as a telephone volunteer for Samaritans. I've based a lot of my practice when I take people outdoors on a kind of a model hidden behind there around how powerful nature connection is for generating mental well-being. So I'm an enthusiastic amateur who's also been in the position that you are in, of having to manage or be involved with lots of not-for-profit enterprises, with all the challenges that we know we have, almost of when you're mission-led, it's very easy to feel guilty or overwhelmed, or to keep on going beyond a limit that might be good for you. So that's where I'm coming from. The last thing that I'd like to say by way of introduction is, if Anna, you could show that little Te Whare Tapawhā model, which I'm sure you've all heard of, but I think it's really important when we're talking about well-being to remind ourselves about this model. Give me a wave of your hand if you've come across the Te Whare Tapawhā model before. Great. Okay, that's good. So for some, it's going to be familiar, and for others, it's really worth looking at. Look, it was developed. I'm sorry, I've forgotten his. Mason Jury. That's perfect. It's there. So it was developed in the health context, and it's got this model of like a whare, and saying that particularly for the Te Ao Māori worldview, that this is a way of looking at well-being overall, or health overall. And I think it's just enormously powerful. So that it's saying that there's many aspects to well-being: spiritual, physical, family and social, mental and emotional, and also your land or your roots. And it's so easy sometimes when we think about well-being to just go straight to the physical, or perhaps just to go straight to the physical and the mental and emotional within one person. But in fact, what this model is saying is that individual well-being is actually part of a much richer tapestry of your family, of your workplace in this context, and even of what's going on the land around us, and what's going on in other realms, shall we say, when it comes to spirituality. And so when I think about mental well-being or mental health, it's so connected to all these other things that I can't even actually really separate it out. Laura, yeah, I hear that. And so, for example, some of our solutions or the nourishing of our mental well-being may come from things in the mental well-being realm. I don't know, like talking to somebody about it. But they may equally come from these other realms too, about your connection to land, or about understanding what spirituality means to you, or actually your body may be the solution to the mental well-being, or your connections within your family and social settings may be that as well. So when you see this, of course, it sounds quite obvious, but I just really wanted to emphasize that today's discussion around mental well-being is definitely, from my point of view anyway, set in this. And this link from the mental health organisation here in New Zealand is here, and it gives you a lot more background if you want to look at it. And when we come to talk about things like what support we have in our organisations, it could even be that just making sure that your governance or whatever have access to a model like this to base some of their policies on could be enormously useful. So that's the end of the context right there. Thanks, Anna. We'll chuck that out now. So we've already done one little well-being thing that you can do, and that was just that check-in and saying hello, or more than hello, a warm welcome to whoever's turned up this morning. So that a check-in, I think, is enormously great. Let's do something now which is again starting with ourselves, but moving into that body realm, about really being able to play around with tactics and techniques for working with well-being. And turn your camera off if you want. First of all, I'd love you to just look around your desk and see if there's anything that you can pick up. Maybe you've got a stapler or a roll of tape or a pen, or maybe you've even got a squidgy ball or something. Just look around in your environment. You might want to get up and go and pick up a stone that you got from the beach the other day. Anything that's sort of light and you can sort of cup it in your hand. So just, yeah, do it. Don't go, oh, I'm not engaged in this workshop. Actually do that. Pick up that thing. Yeah. And now just slowly start to pass. I'm going to get my rock. Hold on. I'm doing it. Just slowly start to pass that rock from one hand to the other. Just do it. There's nothing else than that. Just start to do that. And while you're doing that, I've got a question for you, which is, say you got everybody in your team to do that check-in that I did earlier on, which is just, oh yeah, how am I actually doing today? But maybe you were extending it out a bit to sort of, you know, how are you kind of mentally or in your emotional well-being at the moment overall. And if you did that in your staff in a sensitive way, and you were to sort of find out really how is the mental health of your team at the moment, just have a little guess to yourself about what the spread of well-being in your team would be right now, do you reckon? You know, there might be an average, but there might also be a spread. There might be some who you think are totally fine. There might be some who you're going, actually, I don't really even know that person. I'm not going to ask you to share any of this. I'm just, while you're still chucking things from hand to hand, keep doing it while you're thinking. Just have a little think. If you had to do some picture or a graph or a little check-in, how do you think your team's actually doing at the moment? And again, we don't have to judge it. We just go, oh yeah, that's what is. That is. Have a little think. And maybe you just want to note that down, or just note to yourself, oh yeah, I think that might be where we're at. Or it might bring up a whole lot of things like, actually, I don't know. Cool. So back to our crossing things from one hand to another. So some of you might be like natural fidgets and do this sort of thing all the time in meetings. But I've really discovered for myself that doing something like this is a great way of grounding yourself. It's a great way of diffusing. When you've got like lots of static electricity in you, you might be tense, you might be scratchy, that to be able to pick up something and pass it from hand to hand is kind of like a little sneaky tactic that you can do. And I wanted to just introduce it as an idea, because we're often quite used to doing things like a deep breath and all of that, and we'll come back to that. But the beauty, the magic of these things like passing something from one hand to another quite rhythmically is that you don't even have to think about that you're trying to calm your body down, because you're just doing it. And the key about this is that my rock is going to pass the middle line in my body. It's going to cross from sort of being the focus of one brain hemisphere to another. And there's something, you know, because I'm not a theoretical mental health scientist, it's just magic. There's something about crossing the midline. But in fact, a whole lot of new techniques that are used in mental well-being, like is it EMDR, which is about eye movement. It's a technique used in counseling. It's based on the same thing, which is that our bodies somehow get kind of distracted and moving into that rest and digest phase by doing things that use the opposite sides of our bodies. It's why a good long quiet walk is pretty good, or swimming. But we can't do that right now when you're sitting in the meeting really angry, but you can pass something from one side to the other. And the other things that you can do, which is all about settling yourself, join in if you want to, is just like cross your arms and just give yourself a little tap on each shoulder, maybe even alternate hands. Or some people, you can do this little one here where it's your hands are kind of like a butterfly tap, just either side of your heart there. I actually just got a little shiver down the back of my spine doing that, which is kind of funny. Another great activity that passes the midline, and you might not feel anything consciously straight away, which is, you know, the infinity symbol, which is a sideways 8. Just put your hand out in the middle and just make that infinity symbol, or the sideways 8, and just focus on how that feels making that symbol. Doesn't have to be good or bad, just notice the curves, notice if you want to play with it, notice if you want to swap hands. And that's doing the same job of passing the midline. And so why I'm doing these is because we want to expand and have a great diversity of things in our toolkit to be able to, first of all, center ourselves and then offer them out in the ripples to the people that we work with. And so something, as I say, if you just think of that idea, then you can riff on and make up all your own things. But sometimes if you don't know what to do, you could be actually having a panic attack, or you could just be realizing that you're really off in this meeting, and you want to get yourself back into the zone when you can consciously choose how you're going to react to the situation. Remember that midline and remember ways of being able to cross over it. But let's do some other things too that are more traditional. Body, we're focusing on the body. So the obvious thing is that the more tense you get, your shoulders go up. So let's just do some shoulder rolls backwards. Really focus on just exactly how that feels. I can feel lots of clunks and cracks. And I've gone one way and I'll go back the other. And even just a little bit of shaking. Oh, it's hard to do that. Good. Another one is just our breath. This is a really common one. We know it, but to be able to return to the breath, what a superpower. So just a nice big breath in. And let's all sigh out. Great. Shoulders, breath. Another one that is getting down the spectrum now, and would or would you not do this in a meeting with somebody else? It's called, I remember it from yoga, called the Lion. But what it's really good at is releasing all the tension in your jaw and your shoulders, and just getting a lot of tension out quite quickly. I'll demonstrate a little bit, because I've got normally these hands would be on my knee. I'm sitting kind of straight and relaxed, and I do a big breath in. I'm going to look like a dick, or more than usual. A big breath in, and then I go. So it's like extending your fingers, and a really noisy breath out, and I'm like pukana with the eyes, and I'm really letting my mouth go wide, and I'm sticking my tongue right out. Blank your screens if you want to, peoples, but let's just let's give this one a go. So you breathe in, and then like a lion. I don't see enough dicks out there. Come on, more, but make yourself a fool. And see if you can feel like what it does to you. Yes, I like all the blank screens. Come on, George, do it in public.
I did it. You weren't watching. I definitely did it. Yeah, without blanking the screen.
Now that might be one that you just need to go into the stationery cupboard and do, you know, on those days. But it's kind of a cool one, I feel, because it starts to work on that jaw, on your tongue. Sometimes when you're really tense, you hold your tongue in exactly the wrong place. And I call that the lion roar. And then last but not least, on our series of little tips of taking a moment and not even having to use our intellectual brain to tell us to do anything, bypassing all of that and just going straight to the body to allow it to do stuff for us, is what some people call the kind of 3 senses reset. So literally from anything from having a panic attack all the way down to just trying to take a break. It's like maybe you want to do the deep breath in, and then just look around and just look for 3 things that you can see and name them in your head. Can be anything. Desk lamp, carpet, stone. That's the first 3. The second 3, I pick a sense. I might be going for sound. Sound's usually a good one. There's usually some sound. Computer buzz, fridge, pukeko. The next 3, maybe you just want to pick 3 parts of your body that you would touch. Earlobe, shoulder, finger. So that was a 3 by 3. If you're actually having a freak out. In fact, I remember once at one of the EHA huis, there was a lot going on, and we just changed the agenda for the 4th time. And me personally, I was also very stretched. And I suddenly got up at the front, which I'm not nervous about at all. And I suddenly just felt this huge whoosh of kind of overwhelm. And I was like, oh, hello. Didn't expect that to happen. And so because I have these little habits or these little rituals of taking a moment that I can do, I didn't have to think about what I do in that situation. I just thought, okay, I've got my instruction, I've got my standard operating procedure for what to do when I'm freaking out up the front. And it's like, focus, remember my breath, my shoulders down, look for 3 things. I literally did that, named 3 things. And then I named 3 different things because that didn't work. And by the time I got to 9, I was starting to come down a bit. It's like, listen for the sounds, touch something. Because it's taking your brain out of its whiz off into flight and fight, and it's bringing your body back to the fact that you can say, oh, I'm here, I'm getting back in touch with what's actually happening really here now, and I can get back into that rest and digest zone where I can make decisions. So I just wanted to start with those. I call them taking a moment. And if you could perhaps show that little section on the visual, Anna, about why do you want to do this stuff? Why did I start with this? I started with this because sometimes you just need it. When you're in a bit of an emergency situation, minor or major, for yourself or for your team, sometimes you just need to be able to jump to taking a moment without having to think about it too much. And one way or another, they will help bring things down just a notch. They'll just create a little bit more of an opening for you to be able to make some choices that are probably going to benefit you rather than not. So we know why we need those immediately, but there's 2 others that I just want to emphasize about why we'd want to use things like taking a moment, and particularly a physical thing in your body, is that the more we train ourselves to be able to do this, no matter the levels of stress, the better we get at doing it, and the more able it is for us to be able to do it without thinking when we really need it. It's a bit like exercising a muscle. So when I'm having a freak out, I don't have to think. It's not another thing to think about. I've got that in my back pocket right there, and I've actually got the muscle memory of how to do it. So the training it is really key, and that's why in all those things like mindfulness and that it's a practice. It's something you do all the time. It's not a one-step quick fix. And the third thing is it's about tipping the scale of having all the good body chemicals happening in your body rather than the bad. No, that's not. Scratch that sentence. All the super heightening anxiety, too much of those body chemicals in your system can lead to prolonged stress and, funnily enough, depression and all those other things. But the more that we give our body a chance to reset of a day, the more money we've got in the bank, so to speak, in terms of our resilience. And so the more we do these things and reset and connect back to our, factory setting, the more resources we've got in our tank. So I'm just going to take a pause here because we've got a little orange circle. And I've got the first question for us to have a little quick discussion about. And the way we're going to mostly discuss this, first of all, is starting off in chat. So I don't know if Anna, if you're in a position to be able to share that question number 1. Great.
Can everyone see that all right?
So
you can see it all good?
I can see it. Can everyone else? Is everyone else good? Great. Yep. So we're just thinking about question 1 now. Just blank out the others. So question 1 is, think of a moment. So one of these little tactics that I was just talking about that you would feel comfortable or you think would be appropriate for encouraging at your hub or at your work. What is it? Or how could you introduce it to your team? So there's a couple of things here. We're going to crowdsource a whole lot of ideas is basically what we're doing here. So if you might already have one yourself that really works, and if so, I'd love you to share it in the chat. You might have heard of one, or you might look at the menu of ones that I've already suggested and say, oh yeah, I think I could try to teach or to even, encourage our team members to be able to work on having this one, or maybe you already do, in which case I'd love you to tell us about it. And if you've got one already and you've got plenty of time to work in the chat, come on and say, well, how would you introduce it? Like, would you just share with people that you did it? Would you sort of slightly making it fun, introduce it at a team meeting or have a discussion like this. So I'd love to see your ideas about other taking a moment activities that you use, one that you think you could potentially introduce in your workplace, and or how you might go about doing that. So take some time to whack some things down in the chat and have a look at what other people are looking at. I'll just take great. Thanks for those who put some comments in. Any more for any more? I'd love to get a few more ideas in there. And if you're really not a person who likes to write things in chat, you can put your hand up and we'll come back and hear your idea verbally as well. Great, thanks, Daniel. Good, so there's a question in there for you, George, which we won't take right now, but it sounds like it would be very good to follow up on, which is sharing a bit more about your understanding of those different ways of opening up. So yeah, let's come back to that. And that would also come up later on in our discussion as well. Yeah, so George has got a vote for the lion. Daniel's got a vote for shoulder roll. Yeah. And as I say, I think we can do these things quite playfully. And once the team is okay with that, then that might open up more space to do a whole lot of other things. And I think it's we'll come on to also talk about whether you're overtly introducing the fact that this is what we're trying to do, is develop a tool set for all of us to be able to use without feeling like we're numpties, you know. That's my technical term, because people get embarrassed. And what part of what we want to think about is how we create space for new norms in our workplaces that create more room to be able to deal with. Oh yes, hikatea te ha, thank you. Also in my notes, there is a great set of resources called Taking a Ha Moment. And that's, there's some links in there, and it's got 4 little mini meditations almost that you can do. And it's deliberately created for not-for-profits as a way. It's got all the research behind it about why it works, and they've trialed it with lots of people. And so there's many, that's exactly the one. So there's a little videos that you can watch about the method, or you can just go in and listen to the 4 little meditations that they've got up now, Taking a Ha Moment, and it explains all the theory if you need that as well. So I like that as a great resource. Oh, Joe, fantastic. Those would come up later on in our chat there, exactly. So make well-being every day. Perfect. Great. Okay, so does anybody want to say anything else now, either in the chat or in a conversation about this whole thing about taking a moment, working physically, not necessarily on bits of paper or in having big ideas or big talks, just going straight to the body. And going for a walk is a perfect thing. Going for a walk and talk could be one of those things. So anybody want to say anything else on this now before we move on to the next session?
Kia ora, it's Jo here. Sorry, it's a bit hard to see. There's a big set of questions on the screen. One of the in my role in the organisation, I think one of the most important things is the daily conversations, but also measuring the pulse of the organisation and the people within the organisation and the awareness of what's going on outside of their work life and the things, and intentionally having a conversation about slowing things down. Like, we have the power down so that we bring the whole team along on whatever it is that is the priority at the moment, regardless of the number of teams we have. And that is something I think is really from a leadership perspective. Slow it down, like have that conversation all of the time about how we slow it down and what needs to happen, and giving people permission to rest, because sometimes in a work environment, like, they need permission to rest.
Yeah, I think the key words that I'm hearing there, Jo, is permission, and making it the way we have discussions around here, so that it's a normal part of our work to check in with each other and to say, oh yeah, so how's the speed? Is everybody still with us? You know, to be able to have those kinds of conversations overtly is a great way of making space. Maddie, thanks for that comment that you've got in there about you've got that challenge where there's lots of people working part-time, and so you're not always in the room with each other, but just been able to use the walls to put up those little prompts and reminders. Not bad. What about the back of the loo door? You know, it's a classic place to be able to put things where you can practice taking a moment, you know, and it's not that those moments are going to solve too much work or a major crisis or a huge bereavement. They're not going to solve that, but they're going to build up our capacity and our repertoire of things that we can use to work together and communicate as a team. And so let's move on to those things now. The next thing we're going to hop into is just a quick introduction to some of the principles of mental health first aid. Some of you came along to a little workshop that I ran, and you can drop that. Oh yes, you can keep it there. Go back to the diagram, thanks. Yeah. Some of you went to the workshop we held at the last joint hui, where we all sat outside under a tree and discussed some of these things. So I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail, but I do want to make it known to more and more people that it's available, that it's a thing, that mental first aid is a thing, and that you can get training in it. And maybe one day we might be able to resource all of our hubs being able to get this training, but that the principles are behind the training, which I've done, are really useful for us to be able to think about, particularly as managers, of, again, I use this slightly jokingly, the standard operating procedures that we might have. It's too late once you're in a crisis. It's kind of quite good to have thought about how you would handle this beforehand. And so I want to, and it's also got a nice sort of an acronym that we can remember quite quickly. So the mental health first aid principles have this acronym of ALGE. I don't know, I sort of think about that as a slightly nerdy American kid, algae. It kind of seems, or it could be algae as in like the green things floating in the ocean. So the first step of algae, and when we say a mental health crisis or the need for mental health first aid, it could be someone having a major meltdown. It could be there's an event. It could just be that you've noticed that somebody's just a bit not their usual selves. So the mental health first aid can be used in a whole lot of contexts. You could be in the shopping mall and someone is there shouting for no apparent reason. So there's a whole lot of context that you might use this, but the A is about saying, don't just sink into your own fear or discomfort with this situation. Stop and assess and think, is it a good thing for me to be able to approach and be proactive here? So we're always thinking about safety, but we're also thinking about there may be nobody else who's brave enough or prepared enough to be able to go in when someone is not themselves, or maybe having a serious mental health incident. And people are often very afraid of that, but partly afraid because they also don't know what to do. And most of the time, there's not actually anything you can do as a first aider. You're not the ambulance. you're not the hospital, you're not the doctor, but you may well be the person who buys some very valuable time for that situation. And so this is the first aid, like other first aid, is not that you're assuming you're a doctor, but it may well be that you could really help that situation. You don't have to have the solutions, but you do have to potentially be the one who's prepared to step in, maybe in discomfort, and be there and not sort of ignore it. So particularly in your workplace, not to ignore it. It's about assessing an appropriate approach. Ignoring it is always the worst thing to do, I would say. And so this is about saying somebody has got to be in the position where they're mentally prepared or capable of using these principles to approach and say anything like, particularly to be able to say an observation. I've just noticed that you don't seem yourself lately. Would it be okay if we talked about that? Or you seem pretty, how to say it, non-judgmentally. I feel that you're quite agitated. Is there anything, am I right about that? Or what's going on here, you know? So approach with an open mind. You're not assuming anything, but make the effort to go up and ask. And I could go into that in a lot more detail, but I don't need to because there's a resource there that goes into some of these. But I think some of the principles here are really relevant for us as managers, which is to say, it is actually our job to be able to approach and assess the risks. And actually just stay right there, Anna, because there's a nice little thing at the top here which says nearly half of New Zealanders will meet the criteria for a diagnosis of a mental illness at some stage during their lives. And that this year, 20% of us are going to get a mental health diagnosis. So this is not a rare occurrence. This is actually almost the norm, isn't it? This is the norm. All of us are going to go through phases in our lives of varying mental wellness. And so to be able to have some systems and ways that we know that we can approach and deal with this, it's crucially important. So back to the little diagram, if you can, Anna. And just noting here that there's much more resources available about this. The second thing is to be able to listen non-judgmentally. And that's why right at the beginning of this session, I wanted us to practice doing that for ourselves, because I think it's hard to do it if you're not used to doing this, like finding out about mental well-being and finding out in a way that's not immediately going to judge it as being either good or bad or whatever, or I'll never be able to cope with this or whatever. The mere fact of being there and showing that you're prepared to listen wholeheartedly and unjudgmentally is probably the most useful thing that you'll be able to do in a situation like this. And so that too is a skill that we can work on and develop and learn, is how to be a great listener and how to be able to have enough control of your own reaction to this situation to be able to know how to deal with that at the same time to how to be able to listen. So that's the next step. So you might even want to be thinking about, where are you doing this, or when are you doing this, or who is doing this, so that you're creating the maximum opportunity to be able to listen and to do it non-judgmentally. So in the middle of the busy morning tea room may or may not be the right place. The G coming along now is for giving reassurance and information, and even just that factoid, although facts don't usually help that much, but the factoid about, half of us in New Zealand are going to go through something like you're going through right now over our lifetimes, probably more actually, because that's just at the point when you could be diagnosed. So just to be able to do that, and then to be able to give some other information, which is not advice. It's not like you should do X, Y, and Z. It may be information about, did you know that we've got that little stack of booklets over there about places you can go to for help? Or did you know that the Mental Health Foundation have got a whole lot of information about anxiety and depression there? So you're not, in this case, trying to diagnose. You're not trying to make it better. you're just trying to say, I'm here for you, I'm happy to listen, you know, you're not alone. And then you can move on to the other 2 E's, which is to encourage to actually get some external, probably professional help, and to encourage self-help. And the external professional help, this is, I think we'll come over to this, which is, wouldn't it be great if you already knew where all those places were locally? Wouldn't it be great if you already had a whole lot of easy accessible information resources that are just hanging around in your place? And encouraging self-help is about, when I come back to this thing about peer support, it's about asking things and really mihiing to those person's superpowers already. What do you know that already works for you? Who is your trusted person or people? Who would you feel comfortable talking to right now? You know, what do you find really helps you center yourself? And to really encourage that person to draw on their own superpowers and to be able to do it. And last but not least here, I guess, particularly if it's in a situation where you are working with those people, I would build in some way to get back to the beginning of this cycle again, which is, are you okay to go and do the next thing now? Can I check in with you in an hour, or can I check in with you next Tuesday, or whatever? So to not just necessarily have this as a one-off. And so overall, I think I just want to emphasize here that this is saying you don't have to know how to fix something to be really useful in being able to acknowledge and be there for somebody, and actually implement your duty, which you do have in law, to be able to look after your staff's mental well-being, and that this is a very simple way to bridge what can be an uncomfortable gap. So I'd like us to open this up now to question 2 very quickly here, which is, as I say, this is not mental health first aid training, but it is to say there's some principles here that might not be too unfamiliar with you. And just to take a moment now to ask yourself and maybe share, what would you need in order to start working with a tool like LG in your workplace? And how could you resource getting that there? Or maybe that's not the one for you, but something else. But you know, you've got people there who are all potential support for each other. And how can you get those kind of tools beyond the moments now? We're getting beyond just taking a moment, and we're saying, how can we be mental health first aiders for each other? Have a little think about that. You might just want to make a note to yourself, or you might want to write in the comments something about what you think about a tool like that. How could you work with it? How could you resource getting it? Also open to any comments verbally if anyone wants to say it, but we'd love to get some things in the chat, because that way we can share it with others as well. They might want to know. Love it, Emma. Just be brave enough to start bringing it up and make that a normal way of how we walk. Exactly. If we're subconsciously sending the signal that people having a mental health incident is quite slightly embarrassing, and we just brush over it, you are creating it to be less and less likely that people will actually let you know how things are going. And what a risk that is in a workplace, eh? Which is like saying, all right, we'll just wait till actually someone's completely checked out and they're gone. You know, we can't do that. We have to find a way appropriately to know when we can approach, and to know that this is just actually normal. We're not picking on you. This is what we always do around here. Keep it going. Any other ideas in here about LG? I mean, my bias is that we should just do some kind of fundraising thing so that we can get this training for every single hub. But hey, start with the leadership team. Great, Janet. Yeah. Yeah. Because as I say, I'll come back to it. You know, I had to double check for myself on Friday, and I've put this in the resource, but I went straight to, like, you know, the standard Ministry of Business, and they're very clear about this. In health and safety, this is our legal requirement. You would perhaps be considered an unreasonable employer if you didn't have at least some ways of working, probably written down and known, that this is what you're going to do in these situations, just as you've got your first aid kit with your sticking plasters in it that you check that's well stocked. you know, this is a similar obligation. Brilliant idea, Janet, about partnering with the board, starting to get some of that support from, and what you're doing here is actually jumping into the next part of our conversation. And so because of time, I'm just going to move us on to that, because you're already jumping straight to where I hope we'd get to. So here's our big space down the bottom left hand here, which is making space. So a bit coming back to that analogy a bit, there's some things that are easier to do to make space for mental health, and there's some things that are a lot harder but more powerful. So there's a little hierarchy here which I often use, which if we start at the right hand side, right upstream, of course, if you get the values right and not just that they're written down, that they're actually living throughout your organization, that's the most powerful thing to do, but it's also the hardest to do. Coming back down from that, well, you can actually, in the long run, you can change attitudes and beliefs. That's a pretty powerful thing to do, and it is doable, but you don't do that by next Tuesday. You know, that actually requires a bit of work and education and generating new ways of doing things and all of that. Coming back, so you can change people's behaviors in the workplace. We know that. We try and do it all the time. It's not as easy as you think it is. But sometimes actually by changing the behaviors, you actually help to retrofit the attitudes and beliefs as well, or at least open up a conversation about values. So changing behaviors is not a bad place to start. And then sort of the easiest or the most immediate thing that you can do is you can change the environment. And sometimes changing the environment will immediately just start new behaviors. And again, that can start to be a journey of moving up the line. Changing the environment, what I mean by that is, for example, if you had a new piece of lawn and you were really sick of everybody walking across the newly seeded lawn, you could, have a big long values process about, do we really value the lawn or not? Or you could put up lots of information, about, did you know that 64 kilograms on 2 inches of lawn seed produces a 90% deterioration? And you could do all of that. You could even put up a sign that says, please don't walk across the lawn, or you could just put a fence around it, or put some paving stones down along the pathway that people already want to go, but conceding that now we've made a safe zone for the crossing. So those changes to the environment, I guess, are what in behavior change theory would be called nudges or whatever, but they're the easiest to do, and sometimes they can be a great place to start because they put the triggers actually in the environment to do new things. So what we're going to do now is use this whole model, which maybe this is not the best one, but it's the one we've got for now, of thinking about what we could do differently in our hubs to start to be able to create space for bringing about that long-term mental well-being and avoiding having to do mental health first aid. So if we start on the left-hand column here under environment, here's some ideas about how we could change or nudge the times and places that we do things to make more space for mental health being a thing that we're aware of and we proactively cultivate around here. So maybe it's a quiet room. Maybe it's having knowledge of where the local green spaces are, and that it's normal that we might just put on a green hat or something if we're leaving the office because we're taking a nature break. Maybe we all have timers on our computer. Maybe we have toys that you can pass from hand to hand in every meeting or in every room. So we've got something that people can just go to. Maybe we deliberately think about different times of the day when the smells or the sounds are different. So they're all nudges about times and places that we can do that start to be able to allow us to cultivate mental health well-being environments. So I'd love now for you to go to the chat or start to chat with questions and or ideas just on this one. What are some, let's make 5 new ideas about either what you're already doing or what you think could be done in your workplace to be able to make space for mental well-being. Go for it. Put things in the chat, shout out ideas. Thanks, Emma. Hey, Emma, tell us. Emma's written there, make tidy normal. Do you want to put your mic on and tell us why you said that?
It might just be unique to this site, but they were recovering from the cyclone recovery, and there was this tension between zero waste generation, but a heap of junk got donated. So we ended up being left with ripped sheets and dirty clothes and grubby duvet inners. And at some point you just kind of had to say, well, actually the mess is upsetting people and we need to do a trip to the dump, and I'm sorry, but
yeah. But what that's beautiful though, Emma, is that like that chaos and all that mess was actually upsetting people. So that's brilliant. Like that, you to notice that and go, you know what, that actually is a value that we have, is that we can't work when the environment is actually, yeah, stressing us out. So I love it. It's simple, but it's good. Hey, Janet, what does nature break mean in your place?
A nature break is when you need to relieve yourself in nature at short notice.
Look, that's good. I mean, there's nothing more stressful than not being able to go, right? But Janet, like, because I remember your old offices actually, but you know, is your office still right next to the nursery and stuff? Because I think sometimes it's almost like if I was next to a nursery, I would want to go out and see if you had any lemonwood or manuka or something like that, a really smelly rako, and to be able to go out and go, you know what, normally we're out here being very busy and potting and all of that, but this is also a resource for our mental well-being. No, Janet, just offices now. Hey, Steve, that's
No,
a great
it's right next to the nursery. So I was trying to show you that there's plants straight
yes.
outside.
Cool. And
Yeah.
But do people use that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and is that a norm, would you say that it's a norm for people to say, apart from I'm going to take a nature break, to say, oh, I'm just going to go out into the nursery for a bit?
Not as much as it could be. Some of us
Yeah.
get a bit stuck. I think it's about getting unstuck.
Yeah. Nice. Steve, that's a great one there about actually creating a place where people want to relax. Because I think often when we're in a cash strapped situation, we feel guilty if we spend money on things that isn't overtly about the mission. And it doesn't necessarily mean to say that we do spend a lot of time thinking about, is there a place where our staff can sort of take off their pressure hat and just sit down and take that moment of relaxation? Because actually, if you were thinking about effectiveness and efficiency, which, you know, most of us don't think about it like that, but it's way more efficient for our staff to have properly been able to reset their body chemistry than it is to keep them on height, stress, shoulders up to here the whole time. You know, people will do better work if they've got a place to go and take some time out. Great. Anything else, or anyone else want to say anything that this is thought to? Has anyone actually come across that problem where they actually just don't have the resource to make a place that they think would be ideal for their staff? Is that a real thing?
Values thing of making the space and the time and centering it and how the organization works. It's really easy to just keep speeding up to external demands, but at some stage we have to, like, and very early on, look at what people's capability and capacity is to respond to those. Include rest, respite, learning, reflection.
Yeah. And I think what that made me think of is that it's a nod to diversity, actually, which is, you know, we could make assumptions that everybody wants, you know, scented candles and patchouli smells, and that's going to be the chill out zone. You know, what we need to do is actually go to our people and say, what helps you chill out? And it might be like kicking the football around is the thing that gets rid of that energy and helps them reset. So I guess I'd be saying that, like, the times and the places, it's enormously immediately helpful, and it's also something that's really cool to be able to involve your staff in co-designing and getting involved in, and not to make assumptions that just because a scented candle does it for you, it will do it for them. So, you know, I'm not even saying that it I don't even know what it might be for your crew. Yeah. Brilliant, Janet. Support people to develop a picture and insight about what well-being looks like to them, both individually and then as a team. So you can ask questions like, well, if you had to write your operating manual on the outside of the packet for you, you know, what would you say that you really need to be thriving, particularly mentally? You can get a picture of that individually, and you could say to the team, hey, you know, when do we really work at our best? And so what's around us when we work at our best? How do we use the space when we're working at our best? And kind of, so that's creating a conversation about how we could optimize the space and the time for these things is a perfect. Yeah, exactly, Joe. Some people just need to be by themselves. And so the worst, that would be their total nightmare. I remember when I worked in a government department, and we had to go to morning tea every morning at 10:30. Like, for a extrovert introvert crossover like me, that was a nightmare, because I did not want to have to go and talk about what was on telly last night at morning tea. It was this huge, it was actually a source of stress, you know. So I probably should have just said that, but instead I sort of grumpily went to morning tea. So yeah. So let's move along the move along. Thanks for that, Georgina. Move along the model. We're going up now to what are the things where we're more consciously trying to create new behaviors other than just sort of changing the environment around a little bit. And some of these have come up already. Yeah, thanks for that comment about creating.
Liana, can I just jump in and ask about how the difference between people who have a lot of full-time staff and the people who have a lot of part-time staff? So actually jumping in, maybe not the crossover, etc., and whether there's any kind of thinking around what might work in that situation.
Yeah, good. Let's overtly address that. Is there anyone who wants to talk from experience about that? I think, Emma, you said you had quite a lot of part-time. Is there anyone who wants to talk about that, or we'll make a note of that?
Oh yeah. So it was me who specifically mentioned that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting because our organization is really small. So we've got a very active group of 6 trustees, I think 6 or 7, and we have 5 paid staff members. We're all very part-time, and I work 10 hours a week, and I think probably everyone works approximately 10 hours a week. So some people I literally only see once a month at a 2-hour meeting. And then we've got 5 volunteers that I work directly with, and then some other volunteers that work on different projects. So it's interesting, like, I'm sort of thinking about all of these things and wondering how any of it, I think, yeah, our volunteer meeting, for example, would only be myself plus the volunteers. And then the trustee meeting is like all of the staff members and all of the trustees. So there's no place that all of us cross over in terms of being physically in the same place at the same time. Yeah, and I think it's all quite new to the trust. So yeah. I'm interested, thinking I could feedback some of this, and I'd be interested to see what the reaction would be.
Yeah, I think that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah,
that's what we're trying to do here is create not the set of rules, but create a whole lot more. Just put it up there. It's a thing.
Yeah.
And then start to kind of go, oh, so how can we structure this thing? And it could be as simple as just you purposely yourself deciding, I'm going to be a role model in this, and I'm going to have my interactions where I'm always going to check in with everybody about their mental well-being as well as everything else. Or it could be as big as, yeah, let's get posters, let's have a mental well-being week. We might not all be in the same place, but we could say that we're, you know, it's a bit like why they have Pink Shirt Day and all of that, is to be able to just give it a place and a name, so it's no longer the thing that shall not be spoken.
Yeah.
You know, we just need to
Yeah.
get over that. This is an invisible, slightly taboo, embarrassing thing. We need to break through that barrier, because from then on, actually, probably your staff already think and deal with this stuff every day. It's just that we haven't made the space for it in this particular place to talk about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is why I sort of tried to do a little visual or something like this, because we could even just by putting this up or something like this and saying, hey, we could have a conversation about it. So I'll make sure we come back to this, Maddie. But
Cool.
so in some of these things like policies and procedures, you know, some of us are big enough organizations that we do have to have policies and procedures. Some of us are much more informal, but actually as soon as you've got a board of trustees, that is their job. So as soon as there's a board of trustees, which is coming up here to leadership and governance, you know, every board of trustees has to have an understanding of the risks and their responsibilities by running an organization. And one of those responsibilities is to look after the well-being of the people that they're there. And so even if you just had a simple statement that acknowledged that that was the fact, that's the beginning, I guess. Or once a year that was put on a meeting agenda. So this is sort of policies and procedures is like things like agendas. It's also like, oh, maybe we have a walk and a talk meeting every now and then so that it's not all sitting down. Maybe we have one-to-one check-ins where we actually just say, oh, I'm just going to always do this now, say, how are you feeling mentally? But it could come up to things as much of some organizations now have got policies about time off. And it comes up to things like benefits and rewards as well. So we often know we can't pay as much as we like, but we may have other areas, even when it comes to volunteers in terms of the rewards that they get for being a volunteer, where it may be that, say, for example, there is a free yoga class once a quarter or something like that, because that's something that we can arrange on a swap basis and puts well-being at the center of what we provide. So, and I think the other key thing that's often unspoken, still here under policies and procedures, is workload management. Like some people think that like mental health well-being is about all the soft stuff, you know, and sort of patting people on the back a little bit. Many of the mental health stresses in the workplace is because people are being asked to do too much and the management is really shoddy at figuring out what can be done with the resources available. So I would say that even things like a good strategy and a good annual plan is a way to be able to manage your mental well-being, because if you're being totally unrealistic about what you're trying to do in the year and you haven't actually budgeted it and you've created all these expectations that will never be able to be met, then you know it's like a recipe for stress. So a good strategy, a good budget is actually a great way of being able to manage mental well-being. Is that a radical statement? I'll just go through the rest of the list, and I'd love people in chat to start to add to some of these. Learned helplessness, that's a great phrase to bring into this, Emma. Like, yeah, it's like, how are you actually empowering your staff is a great way of being able to build up that sense of self and that sense of agency in the workplace, which of course is a basic human need to be able to feel like you're doing a job well. And to be able to feel like if you want to, you can progress and grow. That is about nurturing well-being. So I guess what I'm saying here is that well-being is not the soft stuff. It's actually your whole way of working can contribute to it if you think about it like that, if you need to sell it to some bosses who don't get it. But when it comes to these things like norms and rituals, we can design those too as, you know, we can design the way that we do things, or we can nudge it. So karakia, and as Georgia started to explain, other forms that sit in that same space as being able to create the intention for why you're in a particular meeting or why you're doing something, great. Same with thanking or grieving, remembering. I think particularly after, I don't know, I'd love to hear, you know, Hawke's Bay is just such in everybody's minds, and in Auckland as well, when you've just been through a really big thing, been able to note it with its full intent, and you know, to be able to create a ceremony almost to allow everybody to catch up with themselves about what we've just been through is really important. And so being able to share stories, create time to name what's just happened and to be able to process it, these are important things that we can set up. It's not just about the business meeting. It may be we need to do something different. Maybe we need to have a dawn ceremony. Everyone will complain, but I bet you there'll be shivers down the spine if you did it right, you know. So these norms and rituals are also important. Does anybody want to say anything particularly about that? Share an example of where you've done something to try and shift the norm of what we do, or to do a ritual when something big has happened. Does anyone want to share a story about that? What springs to my mind is about a month ago, I attended a rahui ceremony for a river that I've been working with a lot of people trying to have a mountains to sea approach to looking after a particular river. And there'd been a lot of flooding, and obviously it was very polluted. And I was struck again just how powerful, in the iwi declaring a rahui, of course, it's not a statutory thing, but by the people, you know, coming together to do this properly, coming together at dawn to do that, and then the right people turning up again later once the river had come down. This is an enormous way of being able to connect ourselves with that river. And it wouldn't be the same if we'd just said it and signed a bit of paper at head office. It's something about going to a place, standing there all at a certain time, and having experienced that in our bodies, that I think helps these things settle in. Particularly if you're working in that Te Whare Tapawha model, you know, it's to know that it's all joined up together and how we can design those things as managers. Last but not least, just to come to the end of this diagram, which is to say something that you folks have all been mentioning right from the beginning, that leadership and governance have got a clear role in this, and that particularly by just role modeling, but by designing how the organization works, you know, from benefits and rewards, how you set up what risks you're managing and making sure that mental health is balanced in there, about setting up some clear policies to say we care about mental health around here. Actually, if why not do a kind of a little temperature take every 6 months, even if it's anonymous, so that you actually know what's going on, so you are able to track it and manage it. And it's your responsibility to be proactive about this, to say not to gloss it over. Make the space now, because you're going to need it one way or another anyway. It will come back to bite you in the bum if you don't make the space. And making the space is a way of being able to activate all these different levels upstream, from changing your environment to changing the behaviors to changing the norms and attitudes, to eventually this becomes something that's a living value in your organization. We'll never get to nirvana, but it's really important, and it's also really powerful. Any more ideas that you want to drop in the chat would be great, because we'll collect them up. Is there anything else that anybody wants to say before I ask you the last question? So we'll put the last question up, Anna. So here it is, question number 7. And while we're doing this, I'd just like you all to pretend to chew gum. Because if you pretend to chew gum, it's another great way of just being able to get back in your body, loosen up your jaw, give your jaw a little You can go right up here to where your jawbone attaches and just do a little massage. So here's the question. And I'd love to just answer this question by doing a quick check-in with everybody to be able to say something in conclusion, if you'd like. I appreciate that this has not been so much of a chat and it's more of me talking and you reacting. But I guess that's because we're not trying to solve everything now. This is just me provoking, putting the sand in the oyster, and hopefully we'll create some bigger pearls, because I also appreciate what a good job you already do in caring about this. I guess we're trying to take the caring and turn it into more and more practical organizational action. So here's the question. What has this brought up for you as a manager or a coordinator or the person who's bothered to turn up onto this call? What might be your next step? If there's some barriers that you're just already thinking of, put them in the chat too, because I know that that will be really helpful to think about how we can support hubs more. So what has this brought up for you? Just be honest to yourself. And then I'd love us to finish by just everybody getting a chance to say something, particularly about where this leaves you now after this conversation. You might go, oh, I feel pretty good. I feel like I've benchmarked what we're already doing. Or you might go, yeah. So is anybody, we'll just do it. Does anybody want to start? Does anybody want to say anything by way of reflection now about where this has brought you to after this little webinar? Yeah, Maddie, well, you've popped that in the chat. Do you want to say anything, Maddie?
Yeah, I think all of the information, it's like this isn't being talked about, that just all feels completely new in the context of sustainable Wanganui.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, like if you're just new and just at the beginning, what an exciting place to be. Don't give yourself a hard time about what you haven't done. Just start with like, oh, great, we can just make this normal from now on.
Yeah.
Thanks, Maddie.
Thanks.
Joe, you're next on my screen. Actually, Anna, can you take the question off so we can see people's faces better? Thanks. Joe, I'm just going to nominate you because you're next on my screen.
Oh, yay. I guess I'm thinking about it in terms of climate resilience, and that well-being is such a whole part of what it is to be climate resilient. And if we're not well, and if the Earth's not well, and if we're working in a space that's so filled with anxiety, you know, well-being is it. And the whole that is really important. So just working my way through that, really.
Beautiful. So it's almost like we are not just leadership and role models for our organization. We're leadership and role models for society to show that you don't have to be miserable to be green.
Thank you for that. That is a very good reframe. Yes. What Liana said.
Hey, Steve, what are you thinking about?
Yeah, I'm thinking we're actually not in too bad a space. Like I said before, we need to create a space where people can connect. And we had that, and that's going into our annual plan for this year. But also to make the annual plan, what resonated with me, to make the annual plan achievable and doable. And it's one of my team said to me the other day that I'm relentless. And so I need to listen to that as well and reflect that in the annual plan. And then also we sent about 6 or 7 people on the community house put on a mental health 101 course a couple of months ago, and we sent about 6 or 7 of our people to that that are also very well connected in the community. And I think I probably need to check back in with them to see where they're at with putting that into practice within the organisation. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and beautiful self-reflection, Steve. You know, what that made me think of is you don't have your space yet, but what about if one day you just said, right, everybody, push back all the desks or whatever it is, and you just did a pop-up one for, you know, just to sort of say, I know we're all hanging out for it. Let's do something different, you know, to nudge it and maybe get those 101 people involved in it.
Okay. Yep.
Fantastic.
Cool.
Yeah.
Good idea. Thank you.
Who have I got next? Daniel, what are you thinking about after this discussion?
Yeah, I've been reflecting on about how, you know, we've got quite a few different audiences that we engage with and different key stakeholders with like our volunteers, our key volunteers, our Boma Shed volunteers, our CRC staff, our normal office staff, and then our crew, and just reflecting on how, yeah, we do well in some areas with checking in on this, but I think we've got a lot of work to do in some other areas, and I'm just thinking about how we can apply some of the principles that you've said today into those other different groups that are really, really important to us, and we need to invest more into.
Yeah, beautiful. That's great. I think we'll add that down as like, yeah, overtly thinking about your different audiences or your stakeholders, we have a word, yeah, and going through that systematically. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. Joe, do you want to share with us anything about where this has left you?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting discussion. I'm seeing there are some things we do pretty well and some things we don't do very well around mental health. So every month I do ask the whole team, what's your level of negative stress at the moment, which often starts a really good conversation. But yeah, we don't really do anything with tools or anything like that. And I really love the idea of making a space at our hub for the direct idea of de-stressing. So that's something I think we'll look at.
Great, thank you. I'm just going around. Mike, are you there? Come in, Wahiki.
Yeah, sorry, some internet issues here, so I'm
Yeah,
you know, getting to see this beautiful face. Yeah, look, I probably have a different mindset. I think through some of this, I think it's, you know, that the thing is, a lot of times it puts us on the hamster wheel, right? Like these positions and caring about the community and worrying about the environment, and that gets you stressed, right? And so for me, as a manager in this context, I'm trying to weave in ways of working that are more efficient and productive, and then not asking to heap more on in that productivity, that regain space, and then have them able to use that for personal development or checking in or taking a breath or connecting with the community. So I think that's where I'm at in this space, and I'm trying to weave in what you're talking about as well. But yeah, that's what's coming up for me.
cool. And you know, like, absolutely, that's your job, and you may be best focused on getting those ways of working and those processes sorted out, because that's what frees up the time. And there may be somebody else in your organization who is the total touchy-feely chatty chat person who complements, you know, those different repertoires of what you can do. So I guess that's another thing we didn't talk about, which is like delegation, or even finding the people who are already likely to be the shoulder that people will go to, and then totally resourcing them, acknowledging that role that they play in the organization. You know, it's a bit like sometimes people can be the invisible helper, and to be able to celebrate the helpers or resource them, or actually say that's a great role that you play. Yeah, so that's what your comment made me think of as well. Who have we not had? Janet.
Hi guys, I'm in the office, so I won't talk for too long. Thank you, Liana. This has been great, and really just mihi to those who have reflected already. That's a lot of reflections and all totally applicable here. So thanks.
Thanks, Janet. Now, please shout out if I've missed anybody, because I might have got the screen, but I'd also like to open up to Anna and Georgina if she's still here. Georgina's just jumped off, but Anna, is there anything else you want to say in terms of on behalf of the kind of secretariat?
Yeah, just about like what you want going forward in terms of these kind of sessions, and whether things like a mental health first aid course would be something, you know, you would want to do with your teams, and whether that's something that EHA can facilitate. And yeah, you don't have to kind of tell me right now, but if you wanted to take a few minutes after this call and just shoot me an email with kind of, yeah, what you'd like going forward for managers and just for staff as well in terms of what we can provide, that would be yeah, really good for us to have that feedback as well. We are currently in conversation with Anxiety New Zealand about doing a workshop focused on climate anxiety, and also with St. John's as well. So if anyone's done the St. John's mental health first aid course, it'd be cool to get some feedback on what you thought about that as well.
Brilliant.
Love
Okay.
the Anxiety New Zealand resources. They've got a website, it's really useful. We incorporate their stuff in our education.
Cool. Good to know.
Great. So we could probably add that to the resource list on this as well. So what will happen next is that we'll just take some of the gems out of the comments, and I'll add that to the visual and the resource list. And so we'll send around the final sort of slide PowerPoint thing that's got the resources and it's got the questions. So you could even potentially use some of this if you wanted to have a discussion with whoever you want. Great, some good feedback coming in about the Red Cross one as well. So look upon yourselves as the ones who turned up to this, so you're probably already pretty connected to this subject. So maybe even look upon yourselves as being potentially pathfinders for the other people in our networks who may not have got as close to this topic as you have already. So I'd love to have that image of ripples going out. So it's over and out from me. Thank you very much for this, for putting up with this being a relatively one-way process. But I've really enjoyed seeing your beautiful smiling faces, and hopefully, like I say, we've provoked some new little ideas, tendrils of ideas out there. So aroha from me. Thank you very much for your time.